Welcome to Train Signal. You are watching Configuring SRM. In this lesson, we will pair the protected SRM site with the recovery SRM site and then install the SRM license key. We will configure the array managers to allow SRM to talk with the storage replication software. We'll configure inventory mappings to match folders, resource pools, and other virtual resources from the protected site to the recovery site. We'll also create a protection group to identify which VMs are protected by SRM. We'll create a recovery plan to define how the protected VMs will be restored in a failover or in a disaster recovery test. Finally, we'll test the recovery plan to verify all pieces are working correctly. Are you ready? Great! Then let's let the fun begin. We are now ready to pair the protected site with the recovery site, or as it is also called, establishing reciprocity between the sites. But first, it's a good idea to review that we have our prerequisites covered. You'll want to make sure that the SRM server has been installed at each site. We'll also want to make sure that the SRA is installed on each SRM server as well. Again, that's the piece that allows SRM server to talk to the supported storage replication. We'll also want to have the SRM plugin installed into the vSphere client that you plan to use to configure the SRM configurations at each site. Once you've checked off that the prerequisites are all in order, we'll first begin with the protected site and pair it with the recovery site. Second, we'll pair the recovery site back with the protected site. And then finally, we'll install the SRM license key before we forget that piece. For the case of this lesson or for your own lab purposes, you don't need to worry about that since you can use the evaluation key from VMware. Okay then, let's jump right into the demo. We're ready to pair up the protected site with the recovery site now. In order to do that, we've logged into the protected site's vCenter server with the vSphere client. And this is a vSphere client that has the site recovery plugin installed. We're going to go ahead and click on the home to get to the home screen here, and then click on the site recovery plugin. Once we're here, we can kind of orientate ourselves a little bit to make sure we're on the right site. As you can see at the top here, we have local site and we have paired site. Local site has the name protected VC, and the site name's protected site. So that's good. We wanted to start at the protected site, and we've just verified that we can do that. We can also tell that this is unpaired, so we have not established reciprocity, as it's called, yet. So let's go ahead and do that. The rest of this work will be done in the protection setup area here in the middle. We're actually just going to take care of the connection step with this brief demo. To do so, go ahead and click Configure. It's asking us for the URL for the recovery site vCenter server, which we'll go ahead and enter, and then click Next. This is a vCenter server certificate, so it's the default certificate that came with the vCenter server installation at the recovery site. Go ahead and accept that. Then it's asking for an account with administrative credentials at that remote server. We'll go ahead and enter that now. And now you'll notice that the title for this is a little bit different. This is the Validate Site Recovery Manager certificate. So SRM server at the recovery site also comes with its own default certificate as well, which we'll need to accept in order to continue. You'll notice a lot of green check marks there as we go down all the steps it takes in establishing reciprocity. One more time, it's asking us to log into the vCenter server. Go ahead and enter that one more time, then click Finish. Everything's working, and we should see that there's a paired site entered in there. Great. We're going to go ahead and do this on the recovery site, but first I'd like to install the SRM license key so that we don't forget that later, or at least show you where you can do it. Within this SRM screen, what we want you to do is go ahead and find the site recovery option here in the tree and right click on that. Go ahead and choose Advanced Settings from the drop-down. From here you'll note that there is a licensing section that we can click on. You would simply then just cut and paste your license key provided to you from VMware within here and then go ahead and click OK. We don't need to do that since this is an eval copy, so we'll just move right ahead with configuring the recovery site connection. Okay, we're back at the recovery site now. You can see from the top here that we're logged into Recovery VC, which is where I want to be. Again, we'll go ahead and click on the Site Recovery plugin from the home screen, which will bring us in here for the first time. Since we've already done some pairing of the sites, it's asking for us to log back into the remote vCenter server. So we'll go ahead and do that. And we'll install that certificate. Click Ignore. These are the certificates from the other side's virtual center and the other side's vCenter server. That's all there is to it. All we had to do is come in here and verify that the recovery site was seeing the same thing that the protected site was. Since we're not going to be protecting anything on this site to go back the other way, we don't have to worry about configuring the connection here. I just wanted to come in and show you what it looked like, show you how there's certificates that you need to accept, and from there we'll be good to go. Alright, we are now ready to configure the array managers. This is the component of SRM that talks to the underlying storage replication software. You will do this step after the protected and recovery sites have already been paired. But before I demonstrate the configuration of the array managers, here's a quick overview of what will be happening. We'll be providing SRM with the info needed to connect to the storage replication software via the SRA. SRM will also verify it can communicate with the storage arrays at both sites. It will also verify it can see replicated VMware data stores. To do this, you will not only need properly configured storage replication software, but you'll need at least one VM on the data store for SRM to recognize that it's there. Now that you've had a little teaser, let me show you how to configure the array managers. Okay, here we are. We're logged into the vSphere client on the protected site, and we've already logged into the SRM plugin and are ready to begin the configuration. Again, we'll be using the protection setup section as our guide, and we've already done the site pairing. We're now ready to tackle array managers, which it shows is not configured. Just to make sure we're at the right site, go ahead and take a look at local site. Again, we are on the protected VC, which is exactly where I want to be right now. So let's go ahead down to array managers and click configure. We'll want to click Add to add a protected site array manager, and then enter in the information that you'll need for your particular storage replication. Once you've entered the information, go ahead and click Connect. After a brief moment, it should find the storage replication software that you're scanning for. If that looks correct, go ahead and click OK and continue. Good deal. Here's a key piece to understand. It has found a replicated array pair, which means it's found a volume, a VMFS data store to be specific, with a virtual machine on it that's being replicated. If this device count is saying 0, you've done something wrong either with the SAN installation or possibly with SRM. Most likely it's with the SAN installation, as I found in the making of this lesson. So make sure that's one or more, and then go ahead and click Next. This is where you'll enter the recovery site array manager. So go ahead and click Add and put in the information for that array. Once that's entered, go ahead and click Connect to connect into the recovery SAN. Good, we found it. Go ahead and click OK to continue on. Good, we get a green check mark, so we can not only see the recovery VSA, we can see the replicated devices. Before clicking Finish, let's go ahead and review the replicated data stores that we have. In this case, it's VMFS1. We only have one that's being replicated. In a production environment, you may have many. I'll go ahead and click Finish, and that's the end of configuring array managers. What are inventory mappings? Inventory mappings define what folders, networks, and resource pools the recovered virtual machines will be assigned to. You don't have to set up these mappings. They are optional, but you'll have to have a really good reason not to. I would plan on using them in most normal circumstances. If inventory mappings have been established for a site, you cannot override them by configuring protection of individual virtual machines. I'll show you what that means in a second, but at a high level, it means if you want to configure resource mappings for an individual VM, you can only do it if the site-wide mappings have not been set. So like you would see in a default setup, or if someone was to remove all the mappings manually. If you need to override these inventory mappings for a few members of a protection group, you'll need to use the vSphere client to connect to the recovery site. There you'll find what's called placeholder VMs or shadow VMs. I'll show you those in a second once we get to setting up protection groups. Basically, it's a shadow VM that's just the configuration file, and it's stored in a data store that's set up at the recovery site. And you can edit it and change its network and its default resource pool just like you can a normal VM. That being said though, the preferred method is to use resource pools and folders within the protected site's vSphere setup in order to organize your mappings in a more holistic way and not let your SRM configuration get overly complex and manually configured. Remember, a goal of SRM is to prevent complex, not create it. Let's keep your configuration simple, and future administrators will thank you for your design. To help assist with managing SRM protection and moving virtual machines in and out of protection groups or certain resource pools for certain mappings, PowerShell is really your friend here. There are many good scripts out on the web that could be leveraged to move VMs back and forth between these different inventory mappings. These scripts can help your SRM config stay much simpler and easier to execute in pressure situations like a disaster drill or an actual disaster. Well, now it's demo time. Let me show you how to actually configure inventory mappings. Okay, here we are again at the vSphere client, and again we're logged into the site recovery plugin, and we're connected to our local site, which is the protected site. Again, I always do a nice little sanity check, make sure I'm on the right page, and it's pretty much following the dots here under the protection setup section. We've done site pairing, we've done the array managers, we are now ready to do inventory mappings. So to get started, let's click configure. Pretty simple and straightforward here. On the left you have protected site resources. I have one virtual network for my VMs. I have 3 resource pools. I have a cluster, and I don't have any virtual machine folders unfortunately, but we could have those in there and you would see them. So to get started, click on a resource that needs configuration. That will then highlight the configuration button over here. So we'll start with the VM network and click configure. At the tree here, we're logged into the recovery VC, so this is the recovery site SRM setup. I'll expand those until I find my networks. I'm going to choose to use the DR network at the recovery site. And I'll go through on the cluster and configure that, mapping the cluster, which in this case I only have one, to the recovery cluster, which I only have one on there too. If you have multiple clusters, you could see where this would be important. Resource pool for servers. I'm going to make sure that that maps into, I don't have resource pools at the recovery site, so we'll just use the cluster, which is the default resource pool at the default level. We'll do that with the rest of these as well. You get the idea how we can map resources from one side to the other. Finally, virtual machine folders. Not really a folder, but it's the default root level folder for virtual machines, which is at the data center level. We'll configure that and map that to the recovery site. Good. We got rid of all the yellow question marks, or excuse me, exclamation points. If we click back on the summary tab, actually not summary, summary just says OK. We'll click on the site recovery root level with the exclamation or the lightning bolt. And under inventory mappings, we can see that it now says configured. We're good to go. That's all there is to configuring inventory mappings.
Okay, let's talk about protection groups. Protection groups organize VMs based on replicated data stores that they're stored in. SRM also uses a non-replicated data store to store placeholder VMs, sometimes called shadow VMs, that contain the settings needed to quickly recover protected virtual machines in a DR test or an actual failover operation. These placeholder VMs also help administrators on the recovery site to easily identify what VMs are protected by SRM. Before we jump into the demo for setting up protection groups, there are a few prerequisites to be aware of. You should make sure that you have paired your SRM sites and configured the array managers. You also need to make sure that you have configured valid inventory mappings to the recovery site resources needed for the VMs that are recovered. Also, as you're designing protection groups, it's a good idea to remember that you can also protect templates as well. This is a good SRM strategy to keep in your bag of DR planning tricks. You should consider redeploying these stateless VMs as an alternative to replicating many identical virtual machines. Examples of identical stateless virtual machines would be web servers, VDI workstations, terminal servers, things that maybe store an application, but the user data and configuration and critical business data is stored on a separate server that's being protected by other means. These stateless servers are all good candidates for redeploying from templates, not only because they save on replication bandwidth to the recovery site, but it's also a practice that could be possibly leveraged within your production deployments to speed your ability to grow capacity as you need to add these servers. It can also help you stay up to date by simply redeploying servers with the latest updated software rather than updating a lot of identical servers in place. Another good point to think about with protecting templates with SRM is that it gets your business in the mindset of restoring operational capabilities and not just virtual machines. A big part of SRM is that we want to restore the ability for your IT department to service the rest of your business. Having templates available to create new servers for new purposes and whatnot can help your business continue to hit the ground running after a major disaster. Adding and removing VMs from a protection group basically comes down to the operations that move VMs in and out of VMware data stores. For example, if you want to add a VM to be protected, you'd simply storage vmotion it into a protected data store, or you could shut it down and do a cold migration, or possibly if it's a net new server, you could deploy from template into a protected data store. Once that's done, you can simply configure protection on the VM, which we'll show you in just a second. Likewise, if you need to remove protection from a VM, you're simply going to remove it from a data store and unconfigure the protection. Well, enough of the theory and background behind creating protection groups. Let's dive right in and create some protection groups. I'm remoted into the protected site server, and I have two vSphere clients open. One to log into the recovery site so that we can show you before and after and what's happening as we set up a protection group. As you notice here, I have two virtual machines. These are just for demo purposes. These are full out virtual machines. I could boot them up and show you that they're legit. What's going to be created here are the placeholder VMs, which we'll switch over to that in just a bit.